I can almost guarantee that you're going to quit your business at some point. And it doesn't matter how hard you work, how smart you are, or how lucky you get. Because there's a counter running in your brain. And when it crosses a certain threshold, it snaps and you're forced to quit. And the worst part is that quitting doesn't fix this issue because the counter resets. You start again, it climbs out again, and guess what? It snaps again. In my 10 years working with hundreds of founders one-on-one, I've seen this process destroy more businesses than competitors ever could. And that counter comes from accumulating a type of failure the brain physically can't learn from. Left unaddressed, it eats you from the inside until there's no comeback. In the next few minutes, I'll show you what this failure is, what brain mechanism causes it, and more importantly, what is the simple 4-step protocol to rewire it. Now, one warning, the typical solutions you've been sold, like grinding harder, don't slow the counter. In fact, they speed it up until it's too late. It all starts by you understanding something profound. The fact that your brain is a prediction machine. It runs on forecasts. It predicts the outcome of anything you do, compares the prediction with what happens, and updates itself based on the results. That's the brain learning system itself. Failing to predict the outcome of something you do is literally the mechanism your brain uses to improve. But there's a problem because a brain that runs on predictions is constantly writing checks on what you can or you cannot do. Every time you commit to something, you write a check. Every plan is a check. Every time you daydream about the 8-figure version of your company, your brain is literally writing a check against the future it now expects. But then your execution has to cash that check. Every check that doesn't get cash logs a gap between your expectations and your reality, what you predicted and what you ended up happening. Your brain logs that gap into a ledger. The balance on that ledger is your baseline for your ambition, your drive, and your self-trust. And that ledger logs every prediction failure, the same ones your brain uses to learn. The problem is that not all failures are created the same. One type of failure transforms you, the other destroys you. Let me give you a real example. Smart client of mine, agency owner, 7 years roughly into his business, making about 20K a month comfortably. When he worked on something he liked to do and he still flopped, like a campaign that converted at nothing or a pitch that went nowhere, his brain logged the gap. And he got pissed off, annoyed, but he was still functional because he could direct his attention someplace outward. There was a campaign that bombed, there was a funnel to inspect, there was a message that could be fixed, there was something that broke that could be analyzed. The feedback about that lived outside of him, so his brain could actually learn by finding the error, correcting it, and then moving on. So over time, failure after failure, he was getting better. I call that type of failure of output, and your brain is built to learn from it. Every output failure is a prediction error with a positive data attached. That's the sunny side of how the brain learns. The dark side for him came when he didn't do the things he knew he had to do. When he had tasks he'd been avoiding for months, the decision left unmade, stuff let's just not addressed due to procrastination or fear. Everything he knew he needed to do but he didn't do. Those count as failures too. His brain was logging failures after failure without him even attempting to doing them at all. That's what I call a failure of input. And it was eating him alive because it made his attention turn inward. Because he didn't even start the task, there was no funnel, email, or process to review, only his own identity. This input failures was destroying him. Because every time you commit to doing something and you end up not doing it, that's the type of failure the brain cannot learn from. Because there's no error to correct, just a person to indict yourself. And that saps your capacity from within until there's none left. And that's when you quit. And I know that traditional self-help advice has told you that the solution is always to wake up earlier, grind harder, be more disciplined, do more volume. Each one of those solutions is one additional commitment that you end up not cashing. Another check that goes nowhere. And your system that was already failing to cash the checks still accumulates more checks. So you have more underwater ledger. That's why the most ambitious founders have the heaviest ledgers and they burn out first. Now, do the math on your own capacity to manage a business. Say that when you're fresh, you have 100 units of capacity to do work. But every time you don't do what you said you'd do, you log a micro failure of input that elevate your baseline stress. And there's research that tells us that chronic stress takes the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that plans, prioritizes, and chooses, offline. So you end up reacting to everything. Every uncashed check on the ledger raises your baseline stress level and eats your capacity. So you're not at 100, you're really at 85. You are already consuming that capacity. And you have very few units left to manage your entire company. That's why you snap. Because you're not making decisions calm, you are flinching in the shape of decisions. And this is why you doom scroll when you have no time. When you blow up the calm weeks, when you sabotage right when things start working. That's not a character flaw. That is a nervous system with no room left. Discharging, however, it can. And that's because your capacity has been eating from the inside. And I know what you might be thinking, but listen, my stress is real. Payroll is here. Churn is real. Losing deals is real. Yes, all of that is real. But the problem is how you process it. Because what breaks you is not the fact itself, it's the baseline the problem lands on. And the baseline is made entirely on your own uncashed checks. A founder at a low baseline can weather any storm, think clearly, and execute consistently until something works out. But if you have a high baseline, you get triggered by a rude email. And that's the problem, because keeping an elevated baseline have a cortisol level that leads to high functioning burnout that you can sustain for years, but it charges interest to the point that you end up building the ledger and widening the self-trust gap until you develop something called learned helplessness. That's the threshold. That's the day you wake up, you look at your business, and you can't make yourself care because you have proven the case. If everything you say you do, you don't do, why even commit? What's worse is that the researchers who formulated learned helplessness realized that helplessness isn't learned. Is the brain default. In other words, you need to train your ability to think that you can figure things out. You must develop the ability to design the right commitments and then go out there and fulfill them so you avoid logging the gap. By default, the brain is designed to not do work. Now, how do you get out of this? Well, not through more effort, not through more volume. It's by doing less, but executing better. There's 4 steps, and the order is non-negotiable because each step exists to do one thing: stop the ledger from feeling faster that you can clear it. Step 1 is clarify. This is probably the hardest one. It's defining the destination, the thing you are absolutely committed to achieving, the thing that feels inevitable, the specific set of tasks and projects that you commit on focusing on. Because if you don't know where you go, or you decide to go somewhere where the destination is negotiable, you end up downgrading your brain's ability to actually fulfill those commitments. You should only cash checks that you're able to cash. If everything is negotiable, nothing holds, and therefore the brain won't fund a future that it can't predict. So the first thing you do is to clarify. The second thing you do is simplify. I'm willing to guess that 40 to 60% of what you're doing right now doesn't need to be done at all. It must be deleted. At least that's the data that we have with our clients. I'm talking having more than one offer, or having more than 2 channels. 40% of what you're doing right now doesn't need to be done at all. Every open loop is a drag on your brain, and you cannot out-execute an open loop. You can only close it or delete it. And the best move is always deletion, because it instantly lowers your baseline stress level. Step 3 is systematize what remains. Every recurring process written down step by step until each step is so simple, it's almost embarrassing. And it's not because of efficiency, rather because every time you write down a process, you create an external object, and that changes which type of failure you're capable of having. Remember, there's 2 types of failure. Input failure, which is the one that destroys you because there's nothing outside you to inspect, nothing to learn from, so the mind turns inward and indicts your character. A map process puts something outside of you, so when something doesn't go the way you want it to go, you have something to examine. You have a checklist that might have failed, or a handoff that might have broke. And the fact that you have a process where your attention can go to allows you to learn from it. That's why we systematize every single thing that we do. Of course, efficiency is a side effect. And finally, step 4, then and only then, volume. Volume on a simplified, systematized path is where compounding starts, because now everything that you do is a check that gets cash the same day it's written, because you have the capacity to execute. You have the systems to do it. So volume ends up becoming proof that you are indeed working on the right thing. And underneath all these 4 steps, there's just one very clear, simple rule. Never write a check your day can cash, because every kept promise is a deposit on your self-trust ledger. And if you keep your promises for just 1 week, I can guarantee that something will start shifting. And if you do it for a month, you will not recognize yourself, because you'll start building something called self-efficacy, proof of capability that you can figure things out and actually get them done. That's the difference between success and failure. It's not how hard you work, but how much commitments you can keep. The more you keep, the better your brain works. Remember that agency owner that I told you about? Well, 6 months in, a major client, his biggest client, churned on a Monday. His old version of him, he told me, would have spiraled for a week and doom scroll unto oblivion. But he told me that he just reviewed the offboarding call, realized that there was a major problem on the handoff, fixed the system, and allowed him to sign a much bigger client 1 month later. In fact, the best month of his life, I think it was 50K a month, happened right after losing that first client. Nothing about the market changed. He just became a different person because the ledger had flipped. That's self-efficacy. Developing the trained conviction that whatever happens, you can design the next move and execute it. And that's the difference between those who win and those who fail. It's never about the better strategy or the tools or the team or anything like that. It's about having the capacity to execute on what you decide is important, commit to it, and make sure you finish it. If you can become a founder that in the middle of chaos, uncertainty, and risk can design systems, commit to projects, and actually get them done without getting distracted, without procrastinating, you will eventually succeed. Because every time you write a check, you end up cashing, your brain becomes more optimized. And over time, you develop the self-efficacy you need to eventually succeed. See you in the next video.